The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Canyonero. Yeah, Canyonero. And I know that doesn't directly deal with Oregon Trail, but I've had that song in my head on and off since we started playing this game.
So here's the thing about that. When you caulk the wagon and go across the river, that's when I hear that song in my. I don't know why. It's just something about the little animation of the thing going across makes you think of the Canyonero song from The Simpsons.
Yep. No, it's good stuff. I mean, hey, it's endorsed by Krusty, and Krusty only endorses quality products.
Only quality.
Never quantity.
So as always, we've completely buried the lead. We played Oregon Trail.
Oregon Trail.
But we have to do a little bit of upfront. I don't want to say I did research because I didn't do any research, but this is like the most dangerously close to research I think I've come so far.
Watch yourself, Lyons.
Well, it's an educational game, so I feel like it's like there's damage reduction on the amount of research you're allowed to get away with. So here's the thing. This game, we played the 1990 PC version, technically the MS-DOS version, which is available on archive.org. And I'm actually going to leave myself a note because I literally want to put that in the show notes because it's super freaking awesome that you can play old video games on the internet in the browser.
Yep.
But neither of us have access to this original game, but it's for free, right? So while I was looking into where we could play this, because this is also our first ever PC game, do you know when this game originally came out? We played the 1990 version. Do you know when this game originally released?
I'm going to say 83. No? 76? Really? 65?
No, 71. So
wow.
Here's the super short version of this very interesting story. This was like a school project. So these three guys were working on a project and they were tasked with making an educational thing for one of their classes. And so they made the original Oregon Trail as a way to teach how, what this was like this time in history. And they did it for funsies and then never considered oh, this should totally be a business. And then a bunch of unbelievable events happened and they ended up turning it into the game we know, which actually was released to the public in 1974 and then was remade a bunch of times over the decades until we played the 1990 version as kids. And it was remade as recently as this year.
Really?
The year of our Lord, 2018. There's also a card game version where you play apparently the entire game tabletop style. But here's the mind-blowy part. Because we're going to talk about the visuals for this game eventually. The original game was played on a teletype. It was a text adventure.
Huh.
Yeah.
Neat.
Right?
I mean, realistically, that's all you really need to play this game. But yeah, no. So before we get into visuals and basically how much you don't they're not necessary. What's your nostalgia experience for this game?
So I can describe almost everything about the room that had the Apple II in it that I played this game on. So
nice.
My elementary school had pods of classrooms, and our pod happened to only use 3 of the 4 classrooms. So the 4th room was a computer lab, and that was a room we were very lucky. It was a brand new school, so it had all brand new funding and everything, which is awesome when you're a kid because you're just everything is amazing. All the sporting and music equipment is fantastic, right? But we also happen to have the computer lab in our pod. So room just friggin' full of Apple II computers and Macintoshes, and we played friggin' Oregon Trail, sometimes for book learning, but also sometimes just like, oh, you were a good student today. You can, okay, we don't have anything else for you to do. Go play Oregon Trail with your friend Matt. So Matt and I and Alex would go play Oregon Trail.
Yeah, and actually, I mean, and this does, again, speak volumes for, because, I mean, like, Oregon Trail is technically an educational game, but it is fun. It shows you how, like, educational games don't have to be, like, mind-blowing slogs. I actually have kind of a nostalgia experience for this game, and then, like, a tangential one. So, like, my nostalgia experience for this game was just actually that my friend owned it at his house, and we just played it, not even at school. We just played it because it's this fun game, it's fun. People get dysentery and die. It's great. But my 8th grade teacher created a version of this that was like an actual tabletop. Like, he created it from scratch. It was like 4 giant pieces of like plywood that all linked together in a brilliant like 3D one where you put down cards and all this sort of stuff. Like, he made it from scratch. But his was, if this was realistic, his was hyper realistic and like very macabre, and I loved it so much. The one thing I remember the most was that it was one of your children dies from a snake bite. Advance 3 paces, right? And somebody said, like, that's like a good thing. He's like, well, yeah, of course, you got one less mouth to feed. You can move faster. And I was like, huh? Thank you, 8th grade teacher, for teaching me, I guess, law of the conservation of mass. I don't know, but yeah, no. So I mean, like, that's that, and then that further reinforced, because when I played that game, I was like, I'm gonna go back and play more of the original game. So it had definitely been many years since I played it, but I definitely played this well after it had been out for quite some time.
Oh yeah, and this is, we don't normally make a big deal of the number that each episode is, but this is episode 50. It's our first PC game ever, which is, I think, cool, right? That we're adding in some other consoles. But it occurred to me, because you were the one who pushed this for a while. You were like, oh, dude, we should play Oregon Trail. And I was like, yeah, but it's a PC game. We haven't really played any PC games. And then I was like, no, you know what? This game, I think, needs to work its way in, because of all the games we've played and all the games we might yet play, this may be the single most like nostalgia lever you can pull on in like a random stranger. Like, if you know someone is like Gen X, Gen Y, they almost definitely played this in school or at a friend's house or like in the library or something. So you can go up to almost anyone, even if they're not a gamer, and be like, hey, you remember Oregon Trail? And they're like, oh yeah, I played that when I was a kid. It's school, right? Like, even if they never touched a Nintendo, they never picked up a PlayStation, like, there's a really good chance anyone in those 2 generations played this game. And I think that makes it kind of unique.
For sure, yeah. No, I mean, like, basically, you can walk up to anybody and say, Oregon Trail, and they'll be like, died of dysentery.
Right.
Like, they just know. And speaking of dying of dysentery, the visuals. I feel like that was a clean transition. I'm pretty happy with it, sticking with it, moving on. The visuals. What do you think of those?
So I think it's interesting that you already said, in regards to my teletype reference, that you could technically play this game with no visuals, right? And
correct.
There's nothing other than the hunting, I suppose, which could just be replaced with random number generation.
Right.
But there's nothing in the game other than the hunting that literally requires visuals. So they're all there just in service of what is essentially a text adventure. That being said, I am going to be fair, and I know I have mentioned this on some other games before, so please, don't at me. I hate this era of graphics. It's just, they aesthetically rub me the wrong way. They look exactly like early Atari graphics. Everything is blocky in an awkward, craptastic way that I just don't like. I don't like it. There are visuals in this game that I think are really nice, like the main screen, like the little wagon getting pulled by the oxen. Like, I actually think that looks good. Like, it's very cartoony, tokenized. Like, it's what it's supposed to be, even though it's really simple. But anytime, this entire era of graphics, anytime they try and render a person, it just grates me wrong. It's like it's the opposite of the uncanny valley. Like, it's so crappy that my brain is just like, you know what? Screw you for trying to make me think that this is a person.
Yeah, like I thought that, the graphics were, I mean, like I said, like they were, to me, I think the reason why they didn't quite rub me the wrong way is I just consistently viewed them as icing, like,
Yeah, that's fair.
Because I mean, basically, I'm playing this thing for like the mechanical challenge, not for like the graphics. So like to me, like any visual was just kind of like, oh, that's nice, and there was nothing like offensive about the visuals, like in the sense that like they didn't, no flashing lights, nothing, that like was abrasive. And also too, as we said, I think that there's a big, and again, aside from the hunting scene, which we will get into as far as mechanically, but as far as the visuals go, because they are just icing. Like you could literally, like you said, like you could cut all of the visuals out and still play the game. So therefore, like unlike with, for example, E.T. or a game of that nature, where just I really want to bookend though, like experience with look, it's not E.T., man,
Yeah.
but
no, another universal like crap reference you can go to.
Yeah, no, I mean like that everybody likes to point to that as the game that like almost killed the video game industry, but I think that was the pneumonia that almost took the life of somebody who had the flu.
Yeah, agreed.
Like there were a lot of other things going wrong, and it just culminated in this terrible game. But no, I mean I thought that because they were all I just, whenever they were like not enjoyable, I just kind of ignored them, and you can, unlike with some games where you absolutely, like, the visuals are bad and like you constantly, like, you have to be tuned into them. And like a lot of times, like if I just got tired of watching those ox just carry that little thing, I just stopped looking up at that part of the screen and just kind of like watched. Actually, to be fair, a lot of times I just watched the numbers go down or up respectively.
Yes, the visuals for the HUD are thankfully incredibly clear and incredibly useful. Like, if I may quickly jump into how well the graphics serve gameplay, because they know that the information in that HUD is all that really matters. It's even, I think it's more than half the screen. Like, they weren't trying to be like, oh, look, we're going to put visuals with it, right? Because the 1990 version that we played is actually not the first one with visuals. There was a version in the either extremely late 70s or early 80s that had like the solid green graphics, when that was the only, you had monochrome displays, right? It's either off and it's black, or it's on and it's green. And so these visuals and like the orientation of like the ox pulling the wagon and everything, like that's just been refined over time. But the HUD information, what's your health, what's the weather, how much food do you have, like if you don't know those things, you die of dysentery, right? Like horrible things happen if you do not have that information.
Yes, no, absolutely. And so in that case, I mean, I don't, most of the meat of my notes is in mechanics, right? Because it's,
yes,
so I don't know how much time we want to spend on visuals, but yeah, I mean, like basically visuals for the sake of visuals. There, it's like asking like how delicious is this protein brick? It's like, well, it exists, like it's fine,
bachelor chow.
Exactly. It's the protein paste from the Matrix. It's got all of the amino acids you need. I mean, it's just like I said. Like I felt that the visuals were never ambiguous. The one thing I will say for visuals, for the sake of visuals, so visuals and service of gameplay, like you said, the main thing is the HUD. It's right there. You got it. Perfect. Visuals for the sake of visuals, I did. And the problem is I can't comment on this directly, but I did like when it's like, do you want to look around? And you got like little snippets of like what the area overall looked like. I liked that just because I would like to believe that that's somewhat accurate, because why wouldn't it be in an educational game?
Yeah, it's definitely, it may be a stylized version of it, right? But they, they're like Chimney Rock and like some of the rivers that are like super windy and like the mountain ranges in the background. Like they were attempting to be thoughtful and representative of reality, because otherwise it wouldn't be very educational.
Right. So I did kind of like that, where it's, and I did like that it was an option. I thought that was an interesting kind of choice, where it's like, hey, you're here, and it's not like, and now you have to watch a 10-second cutscene, basically. It's like, do you want to see it? And it's like, no. It's like, okay, that's fine. Yeah, but it's here. It's here if you want it.
Yeah. So let me address those little I don't know, matte paintings. Like they're big static shots of like it's Soda Springs, it's the travelers in like relaxing in the springs, and like it, Chimney Rock, it's the big Chimney Rock, and right. So it's like all these landmarks that people would stop at along the way as like kind of waypoints. This is me trying to grapple with the fact that I know why these graphics suck, like by modern standards. And it's because these graphics were being made at a time in history when there literally was no book on how to do good pixel art. And the reason it stands out to me in a lot of these like PC era games or these early like MS-DOS and early Mac games is because these had, for the time, very high fidelity screens, like way higher than your television. So when you bring home your Atari and you play E.T. on the Atari, it had like 5 pixels on the screen and one of them was half cut off and it didn't change colors, right? Like, I mean, it was awful. Like nobody's TV was high resolution, but these monitors were relatively way higher resolution, but they didn't have the artistic techniques. And this is why like certain companies like Nintendo in the early days and Sega massively set themselves apart, because they were like, oh, if you do this with the pixels, it looks like shading, or it looks like movement, or it looks like, a reflection off the water. And as people discovered these techniques, there was this, you only need one person to discover it and then everybody else can copy it, right? So you have this like super hockey stick change in the quality of graphics. And this is like right before that. So all of the tools are there, right? These machines could generate the colors and it had, enough pixel density to do like shading and nice detail, but that is not what you get. You get flat, like MS Paint quality graphics that just, oh God, it just boggles. It feels like this lost opportunity. And part of me is just like, this is ugly. And then the other like more, empathetic part of me is like, they didn't know. You can't blame them. They literally, no one knew at this time. But it just drives me absolutely nuts to look at. On the positive side, there are several places where you can tell there were thoughtful people about like what the visuals could do mechanically. Because when you talk about visuals in service of gameplay, the little ox is pulling your wagon, and if you're on like a bumpy trail, the wagon actually bounces a little bit. It's really subtle. Like you might not even notice it because it is incredibly subtle visual, but the wagon will actually bounce a little bit. And sometimes like that's an indication that like you're about to break an axle or you're about to break a wheel because you're on rough terrain. You usually don't break a wheel randomly when it's moving smoothly, right? So there's all these little like visual things that I don't know if they're there for mechanical reasons, and we'll talk about that later. But they are at least there to make the game feel more visually rich when it is essentially a text adventure.
Yes, agreed. So, I mean, and I didn't even notice the bumpy wagon thing, but so overall, the visuals, yes, this game had them. No, it didn't need them. I don't feel that they really add much to the game, but I also don't feel that they detract from it either, Yeah,
they certainly don't detract from it playing it now. And at the time, it was probably like, oh my God, look at all those colors, everything pops.
I'm on the Oregon Trail. Yeah. The colors, Duke. The colors.
Yeah, I'm sure people were way more future, like excited, kind of the way we look at VR today in 2018. We're like, oh my God, it's like I'm there. And in 5 or 10 years, people are going to be like, do you remember when people played what they thought was VR and it was like a Virtual Boy?
Yeah, no, because basically, we've got like this VR and we're like, oh my God, so amazing. But then in like 50 years, somebody's going to do a podcast called Nostalgia Jack. Like, oh, remember when people used to just like jack in, like the old fashioned way? But now we've got like these like hyper realistic, it's like, yeah, that's going to be.
Now we all live in these gel pods permanently and we're perfect emotional beings that float through space.
Speaking of, check out our new channel, Nostalgia Jack, coming soon. But anyway, so that's pretty much all I had for visuals. You and sound ain't much more robust in my notes either.
Oh geez. The one thing I'll say about visuals is I will say this is almost definitely another first where this may be the first game we've ever played where it didn't need any. Like you could absolutely play this game, and people did for several years play this game with no visuals other than the text. And that might be a first. It may be a last. I don't think we're going to dabble in the 70s era a whole lot.
No, I mean, because I don't think that there's a whole lot of, again, like Oregon Trail was like very educational. The only other game I can possibly think of is I was trying to remember recently. There's a movie where like it ties together with a kid playing an adventure game where it was like throwing, like, I think it might have been Big. I don't know, but like where
I was thinking at first, I thought maybe you meant like war games.
Might be war games, but anyways, like where, yeah, like stuff like that. But anyways,
yeah. But yeah, yeah, the visuals. There are some.
Yep.
We normally say that snarkily, but this time it's like, yeah,
like it had them, didn't need them. It's not. It's the opener. It's like it's not what I came to the show for. I came to the show for the mechanics, but I mean this was nice too.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about the audio then. There's even less of that.
Yes, no, literally, and again, I know that I'm like the lame horse when it comes to audio. I have one audio note, which was I could have done without this. Like this is the difference, though. I think that if the audio falls on the side of I didn't need it, but it was fine, like I was okay having it. This was I didn't need it, and I didn't want it.
Oh, you mean
like,
the visuals? The visuals were like a pleasant surprise, but the audio is like, eh.
Exactly. Yeah, like the audio falls on the other side of that razor thin line of like neither of these, if you pull them out of the matrix between like necessary and pleasant, like necessary to unnecessary, pleasant to unpleasant, they're all super unnecessary, and one of them is necessary and pleasant, and the other one is. One is unnecessary and pleasant. The other one is unnecessary and unpleasant.
Yeah, my problem with the audio is that they have the exact same issue as the visuals, which is like people just didn't know how to write good chiptune music really for this hardware at this time in history, right? Because this version came out in 1990, but it's really close to what they were doing way earlier in the 80s, right? And every time you release something, you have to code it brand new for that hardware, so you want to do as little work as possible. So the audio in this version is like, it's just all turned up to 11. Like all of the sound effects are like full brightness, full fidelity, full volume, just really grating, very little in the way of harmony. It's just like a recognizable melody. So it's, a lot of like camp down races, like things you would associate with like a frontiersy kind of like, oh, we're out on the trail and it's that time in history, right? Like I get why they made the musical choices they made, but God, it just sounds like such garbage, like so bad. And because they knew this game was being played in schools, it conveniently comes with an option to turn all the audio off, because they probably were like, well, the only place that will ever have computers is a school library. So we can't just have this blaring out, and unless the kids have some kind of head-mounted monitoring system. So it's right there on like every screen is like turn off, disable audio, or turn off audio, or whatever it says. So it's, fortunately, not only can you do without it, you can do without it.
Yes, absolutely. No, because the first time I played it, I actually played it because you can play it on your laptop. So I played it in an airport and I just turned off the sound, and I was like, okay, let's do this thing. Turned on the sound. I was like, got it. Turned on, and like it basically just like immediately turned off the sound again for my second run, and then I played a little bit more where I was like, I have to listen to the sound. But again, like it is all like it if you can like close your eyes and listen back through time to like, and what you imagine, what you remember the terribleness of like an 80s computer sounding like, this is that. It's just no nostalgia goggles required. Like it is exactly what you remember, Yeah,
it's every bad Atari sound effect, just bright, loud chimes and ding and boops and beeps, and oh god, it's bad.
Oh yeah, no, it's like like now it's kind of like like everything was like warm, and I felt safe. And I was finished. But now I've just been teleported back, and all of the sound effects are bright and loud. This is hell,
So as a fun aside to this, actually, since there's nothing else to say about the audio, there's only music on those little bonus screens you were talking about, and the rest of the game has almost no even sound effects, and there is zero music. So, there's nothing else to say about the audio. But I do have a side story. So when we were first talking about we were going to play this, I found, because I was like, wait a minute, archive.org has this. And so I went and I found it, and I was like, oh, good, it runs and it works fine. Well, you get about 3 or 4 screens into the game before you actually hear the first sound effect or music, and it's a musical score. When you start, you've bought your supplies, you're starting on the Oregon Trail, and this is being played in an emulator. You know, it's being emulated in the browser. Emulators are not always perfect. So it got to that screen, and it is making this grating, horrible static noise. And I was just like, okay, there is no way in hell this is what this actually sounded like. Like I would, you just, it sounds like modern static even, right? Like you can tell it's not, like no old computer could even make these noises. So I was like, obviously something is wrong with the emulator. So like I restarted and exact same thing. I switched to a different browser, exact same thing. I'm like, oh God, oh God, I don't know how. And I remember messaging you and just being like, dude, I don't know how we're going to critique the audio in this game if the emulator is literally broken. And then like I didn't get to play for a few more days, and I fired it up and it played fine, and it played fine every day for the rest of the playthrough. And I was like, thank God.
Yeah. No, I think basically, you know, like if I remember correctly, what you told me you did was you took your RAM out and you just blew on it, right? And you put it back in.
That was exactly what I did. But I had to do it on the server where the actual emulator is being. Yeah. So I had to go to Amazon and find yes.
So now I'm just picturing like you walking like very confidently into their offices and be like, "Hey, what the shit," and then like you keep walking, you get to like the server room, and like you've now drawn like a small crowd of people. You're like, "What is he doing?" Just rip like this like thing out, you blow on it, throw it back in, and they're like, Oregon Trail must have been acting up again. You know, you're the third guy this week.
And the thing I like about this story is that the music is terrible because it's from a terrible time in video game music history. We actually, for a brief moment, suffered through an even worse version, right? Like this.
Yeah, like it's possible.
Yeah, the thing we're complaining about was actually like not the worst it got.
So for anybody, this is my side tangent, and then we can move on from audio. But like, is it you were? It's like bad, you know, like just bad. It's the music is the guy at the party who doesn't really play guitar, you know, that well, but they're like trying, you know. And then what you got was Jake Peralta strumming the guitar and just screaming at the witness. Like that's where you're like, wait, that can't possibly be that. And you fuss with it and you're like, oh no, it's just that guy in college who, you know, would ruin parties by not putting down the guitar.
Okay, Bill, we know you know how to play Smoke on the Water. Just stop it.
Does it take talent to play a guitar? Not the way I play it. So,
all right. So do we just go into the meat of why we're all here?
Yes. Let us talk of mechanics, and let us. So this is the one I've been wanting to talk about. I think we touched on it briefly, but this is the one that I've been wanting and just dying to talk about since we started playing. So, first thing before anytime there's a screen where there's a series of like choices, you know, to make, you can always say, what does this choice mean? And it tells you.
Yes.
And that's awesome.
Yes.
And that's like something that like a lot of modern games, and now a lot of modern games may not do that because they don't want you to know. And that's fine. If they don't want you like looking under the hood, that's entirely fine. But like at the very beginning where it's like, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a banker? Do you want to be a carpenter? Or do you want to be a farmer? And it's like, what does this mean? It's like, here's what it means. And that I found super awesome, especially again, from an educational game, because it's like, I need to be educated on the choices that I'm making. So that's awesome. But that being said, banker, carpenter, farmer, man. Which do you do?
Okay, so I did several playthroughs. The first one I played as the carpenter, and that family died. They died. They all died. We didn't make it. No, just nowhere close, because I was making fairly rash decisions as a way of quickly stress testing, right? Mm-hmm. Because the game, if you play the game start to finish and you know what you're doing, it's like a 10 or 15 minute experience, right? So I just went in and I was like, I'm just going to like press buttons and just see what the feedback is to my inputs. Like, what are the outputs to these inputs? So they died super fast. I played my second game as a carpenter and I finished. Not everybody survived, but we finished. And then when I was going to start the third one, I was like, I should probably take time to just read this screen right here that explains the differences between them. And then when they said that the banker starts with the most money, I was like, well, I have all of the information I need now. And then I realized after a few more playthroughs, I was like, oh, it's literally just easy, normal, hard.
It is. And I thought that was a very clever way to do that for two reasons. One is because it's it is a difficulty setting, and they're very clear at the beginning, like, this is what this means. So as opposed to just being like, do you want to play on easy, medium, hard? It's like, do you want to play with, do you want to be this type of person? Which I don't know if they did it on purpose. I'm going to assume that they did. Is a brilliant real world commentary, because what's the difference between playing life on easy mode and life on hard mode?
Money.
How much money you start off. Yes. How much money do you start off with? And just for my personal playthrough experience, right? So the first time I played through, I saw that, like I saw easy, medium, hard. And I was like, okay, I'm going to play on easy, but I'm going to play as the banker, right? And I was like, all right, I know this game's super, super hard, right? I'm playing it. I'm playing it as the banker. Let's make this have real stakes. So I named all of the characters after my family members. And I will tell you what.
It's a bold move, Cotton. Let's see if the strategy plays out for him.
And and not a single person died because I took zero risk. Like, anytime it was like, hey, man, do you want to ford the river? It's like, no, I'm going to pay somebody to do that for me. Do you want to go hunting? No, I'm just going to buy literally tons of food. It's like anytime I could throw anytime they were like, we recommend that you have X amount of supply. It's like, do you mean X plus 50%? Because that's how much I'm throwing in this wagon, man. Let's do this. Now, not everybody was in the best shape when they got there, but they all got there. So then having all right, I did it. I climbed the mountain, now let's get silly. So the second time I played through as a farmer, and I decided to change up the narrative a little bit. So I named the characters different. I named them after myself, of course. Aaron Glazer, a mutual friend of ours. Allison Keefe, another mutual friend of ours.
Sorry, Aaron Glazer, host of Movie Medicine, another show that I produce that you should go subscribe to. It's Movie Medicine.
Go check it out. All of her movie medicine knowledge did not help her.
Nope.
Joseph Tomlinson and David Lyons.
Crap, did I die?
Well, it's interesting that you said, "Oh crap, did I die?"
Ah, crap.
Because you had the most honorable death of all, sir. You died of dysentery.
As the wagon leader, I blame you for giving me the tainted water. God damn it, George. How many playthroughs did you have to do before you were like, I want to make sure I can say on air that Lyons died of dysentery?
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I believe in multiverse theory where there's an infinite number of universes, and that's an infinite number of versions of myself. I just happen to live in the one where everything works out for me. So fortunately, I got it on the first try.
Nice. Well done.
But yes,
well done.
You died of dysentery. Let me just double check my notes here. You had a fever, and then you died of dysentery.
They often go together.
Allison died of diphtheria, which I thought was weird because you can get vaccinated for that. So I was surprised that she didn't vaccinate herself.
Yeah, not a lot of Walgreens and CVS's on the Oregon Trail.
Look, I'm just saying I was disappointed in her. And Aaron had typhoid but survived, and Joe broke his arm but survived.
Nice.
So, and man, I made rash decisions. I mean, they survived. They lived, but not well. Like, their rations were meager. Our pace was grueling, but we got there, man.
So I was actually saving this for the end, but since we're doing this now, this is a perfectly fine time to talk about it. So I had weird naming conventions because I'm one of those people who will spend entirely too much time looking at the, what do you want to name this character box? So I'm not, this isn't a commentary on anything. I'm truly, honestly not trying to offend anyone. But for some reason, my first party, the one where everyone died, they all had super biblical names. So again, I'm not saying anything about religion. This is not a commentary. It was just a coincidence. My most successful party, unfortunately, just because those people were very well prepared and just met with terrible luck, they were named after the Munsters.
Huh.
So like Herman Munster, Lily Munster, Grandpa, Marilyn, and Eddie. And fun fact, if you never watched the Munsters, Marilyn is the only one who doesn't look like a classic horror movie monster. She just looks like a normal teenage girl. She's like a normal high schooler. She's got blonde hair. She's very, very what you expected a high school girl on television in the 60s to look like, right? Like white, blonde, perky, So she died, and all of the monster people survived. And that I don't think is a coincidence. That I think the game actually knew what it was doing.
No, because then it's just kind of like, you have arrived in Oregon? Only us monsters here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. No, Oregon is like Hotel Transylvania.
One of the other things that I did want to touch on is, so we spoke about the visuals not being entirely necessary except for hunting, right? So, I mean, I did feel that the visuals on hunting, they were very clean. They weren't pretty, but they were clean, right? But here's the thing, is that the UI is so unbearably clunky, right? And the way it lays out the obstacles, and with how quickly the targets move, right? Realistically, my skill played little to no function in how much meat I brought home,
Agreed.
I mean, like the opportunity, I did have to capitalize on the opportunity, but most of the time it was the opportunity afforded to me, And so I do think that the one place where the visuals were necessary, they kind of weren't. You could have just literally say, I go hunting, and then have it just say you brought back a random amount of food, because even though they were trying their best to like hand agency to you, it's a pretty thin veil. Like you can quickly see through, like, no, I didn't really have a whole lot of agency there.
Well, and I assume that it must have been either not an option at all in the original teletype version, or they did it through some kind of random number. So this proves that I didn't do any more research than you would want me to, because there you go. I have no idea how they did that on the original teletype version. But my problem with it is not just the awkward controls, because you can move, but it's like really awkward, and unless you have a 9-digit like a full number keypad, because by the way, this is keyboard only game, right? So like almost everything you do is selecting options from a list of options, so you essentially play this with numbers and spacebar.
Yep.
But
which funny side thing to that,
mm-hmm.
Like when the first time I said, like, which do you want to do, 1, 2, or 3? I pressed 1 and patiently waited for longer than I should have before hitting like enter and like actually executing. Like not an unbelievable amount of time, but definitely longer, because I was like, 1. What do I do now? Oh no, I need to hit spacebar. I got it. I'm smart.
Yeah. So to further kind of along that path, not only are we not used to controls like that, but modern laptops tend to not have a number pad. And the hunting mechanics, if you want to get good, you need to have a number pad, because that's the only way to quickly turn, right? With any kind of precision. So moving is so clunky as to be completely obnoxious. And the obstacles, this is what I was really getting to. The obstacles are placed so thickly sometimes that you have to happen to be standing on an already dead bear to catch a bear. Like otherwise that day of hunting is just wasted to you. And that's what bothered me, is the second the hunting screen loaded, it was just like, I'm not going to catch anything here, because there's trees strategically placed near rocks so that unless something wanders right up to my gun and then like eats the muzzle of my gun and patiently allows me to shoot it, I'm not going to catch anything. So that was like the thing about the hunting that bothered me, is I get like they're super fast because they're animals, and like that it's, I can't aim very well because I only have like these 8 directions I can point in. Like that is fine. But the way the obstacles were placed, I found less forgivable.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think that what I think the game was trying to do, and I think it just did not quite have the hardware to do it, is, so I think the way they kind of compensated was a little clever, which is that if every time you went hunting, you were capable, like if you did get good, right? and you were a capable hunter, right? Then that part of it, then you would always eat well because you would always just spend time, hunt, get 100 pounds of food and move on, right? So the idea is that sometimes they needed you to come back empty-handed, right? And so their way of doing that in a way that didn't make it seem like, oh, well, they never gave me any opportunities at all, where they just basically put you on a blank screen and had you sit there and stare at it for 2 minutes while nothing showed up, is they were like, okay, well, let's just add a whole bunch of obstacles so you get that sense of frustration from having had a failed hunt. Still super frustrating, still not.
If they were trying to instill a sense of frustration, mission accomplished, because I left a lot of those hunting sessions just being like, if real hunting was anywhere near this difficult, no one would have made it.
And so I think that that's what they were trying to do. But I think the problem is that it's the suddenly inverting the controls version of difficulty, which is to say that they are trying to make it difficult and frustrating, but they're doing it by making your interaction with the game difficult and frustrating, not just making the game itself difficult and frustrating. So like I'm sitting there like clunkily like mashing at a keyboard being like, I need this to work better, but it's just not, whereas like, as opposed to being able to be like, my interaction with the game is flawless. It's just the world has kind of turned on me, So I don't know whether that was intentional or not. I do know that mechanically I felt it was well served because once I realized that I couldn't just go out and bring 100 pounds of food home every day, I did start buying more food at the general store. And when I was the banker, I was making it rain, Fliff.
Oh, yeah.
And when I was the farmer, I was way more, let's just say I was more judicious with how many calories each of you got.
I'm sure your meals were not reduced, you fat piece of crap.
Hey man, look, I gotta have my mental acuity so that way I can tell which one of you is weighing us down the most.
And leave you out as bait when I hunt bears.
Speaking of fun math problems, I felt the math problems in this game were pretty enjoyable, in the sense that so one of the things
did
that
you accidentally put in the wrong disc and start playing Math Blaster?
No, although we should totally play Math Blaster. Anyways, sorry, this is a different thing. So actually, our friend Allison Keefe, who definitely died of diphtheria, she's a teacher, which again, why die? It's fine. It's just, again, just very disappointed.
Embarrassing.
But she's mentioned to me a number of things about like basically tangential learning, right? Where it's not what you're setting. Like you don't like straight up teach what you're setting out to teach. You teach it in a way where like they're kind of like learning things on the fly, kind of. It's a very poor description of it. But this game does that, where basically it's teaching you math in a way that you don't even know that you're learning math. For example, at the beginning when they say, hey, how much clothes do you need? It's like, I recommend that you have 2 pairs of clothes for every person on your wagon. It doesn't say, I recommend that you have 10 pairs of clothes, right? So you got to be like, okay, well, I've got 5 people and 2 pairs of clothes per person. That is 10 pairs of clothes. Like, it's making you chug that math in a way that's like good and satisfying, but in a way that you're not like being told like, hey, what's 5 times 2, right? And I thought that was pretty clever.
Well, and it's also, in their defense as like game designers, particularly of this era, it's like a way more believable interaction, right? Like, hey, we're heading out on the Oregon Trail. What do you think we need clothing wise? Like 2 pairs per person, right? Like something for warm weather, something for cold weather, because the person in the shop does not know how many people are in your party. And even if they did, that would in no way impact their answer because it scales linearly. If you have 2 people, they still each need 2 sets. If you have 4 people, they still each need 2 sets, right? So the correct answer that you would get from a shopkeeper would be something that answers the question in a way that is easy for him to answer and meaningful for you to hear. So this is like a rare opportunity where the math educational aspect is also sort of what would naturally happen. So it doesn't feel like, oh, how many oxen do we need? And it's like, well, if one of them is going north at 40 miles an hour and one of them is going east and leaves from Washington State, and it's just like, oh God, no, stop it.
Well, and one of the other things that the other math things that they did that I thought was pretty interesting and clever was like, or at least the way I interacted with it, I thought was enjoyable and very kind of, again, telling, is that the first time I played through, they were like, food is like 20 cents a pound, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they're like, I recommend that you have at least 100 pounds. I was like, got it, 150 pounds, no problem, right? And then like later on, people are like, oh, it's 40 cents a pound. I'm like, look, man, just give me like 300 pounds of food, whatever, like. And then when I was a farmer, though, when they were like, food is 20 cents a pound, I actually chugged the math. I was like, okay, how much is that going to cost me? Right. So I thought it was very interesting because when I was the banker and thus money was not a problem, I bought by my need. Whereas when I was the farmer and money was very limited, I bought by what I could afford.
Right.
And I thought that like was just such a great, amazing, subtle difference in the way you play the game. And again, like, it's harder. I've got to, interestingly, the banker who would probably have access to better education and thus be better at math is forced to do less math because it's not as important for them to do the math. Whereas the farmer has got to chug all that math because he has very limited resources. So I thought that was kind of an interesting kind of twist.
Well, and proof that they were thinking about replayability to some extent, either because you died or because they're hoping you're going to like try other strategies. And there's a couple times the trail forks, maybe try other forks on the trail. You can, anytime you are at like a fort or a town or a place that has a lot of people, so like any of the scenic stop-offs, basically, one of your menu options is talk to people. And I think they either always say the same thing or there's only like a small list of things that people will say to you at each location. But one of the very last things, I think if you stop at the last fort before the end of the game, one of the things somebody says to you in that fort or town or whatever is like, can you believe the prices they're charging for food? It seems like every fort they're charging more prices. It's such exploitation. And I was like, damn it. Because I was also the banker, like that had absolutely not occurred to me. And then I was thinking back to an earlier playthrough where I was starving to death and I was like, and then, but if you do the reverse, because I'll tell you this, one of my, like, I was like, I'm just going to, finger pistols, play as the banker and do whatever I want. I bought like a bajillion pounds of food in the first town where it cost almost nothing. And then we were away from that town for about 15 days before I got robbed in the night. And the guy stole an unreasonable amount of my food. Like this dude lumbered off in the middle of the night with like 600 pounds of food or something absolutely ludicrous. And I was like, oh, see, that's why that strategy doesn't work. You can't just spend all of your money in the first town because crap may go wrong.
Right. Even though, which again, it's a game, but it's like, I feel like that the strategy of buy a whole bunch of food that, is difficult and cumbersome to haul away versus keeping a whole bunch of money, which is very easy to haul away and can be exchanged universally for any good or service, makes more sense, from like a robbery standpoint. But, again, like they do want to disincentivize that place.
I was robbed several times and they always took stuff. I'm not sure the game actually allows them to take money, which, assuming you sleep in your clothes because you have nothing else to sleep in and your money is on your person, I guess that would be the last thing they would go for because they'd have to kill you.
Again, probably on the table, but not the game that they're trying to
make. Yeah, no, there
like,
may be versions of Oregon Trail where it's like, a thief comes in the night and murders Marilyn Munster and steals all of her money, but that's not this version.
Exactly. I mean, I know if all of a sudden the robber comes in the middle of the night and you lost Joe, I've been Joe, no, but like, as long as they didn't take my money, though. I mean, honestly.
I mean, because you can exchange money for goods in New Joe's, but
yeah, exactly. I mean, oh no, let's not go. Anyway, so, but yeah, so overall, we actually managed to hammer through a lot of my mechanic stuff pretty quickly.
One of the other questions for you.
Okay, so the one other thing, though, that is just a throwaway thing that I wrote down that I definitely wanted to touch on was just, this was just tickled me, was I was in, I think, like something Pawnee, right?
Yeah, let's just.
There's an area.
You were in Minnesota. Got it.
Yeah, where it was Pawnee, and it said the Pawnee are the like vicious enemies of the Sioux, and I was like, oh my god, I'm in an episode of Parks and Recreation. Like I'm the person that they have all the terrible murals about. Like, oh god, what have we done? So I don't know, like that. Like I genuinely belly laughed in the airport and drew some attention to me.
Yeah, there are quite a few instances of racial insensitivity, a little bit of whitewashing, right? And some of that, I think we should be fair. Some of that is probably just an artifact of 3 students in the 70s, in the early 70s, saying like, okay, we're going to basically make this, like a little, we're not going to talk about the people who died horribly in like a graphic way, but like people are going to die. And so there's like this general toning down of reality just because of the nature of what this thing is. And I'm not trying to cast aspersions on these 3 particular guys, but like you have 3 white guys in like a well-to-do university system. There's going to be bias toward successful white settlers and not really talking about or saying anything positive about like the native people, because there's a couple screens that have native people on them and the color chosen for their skin tone happens to be identical to everyone else's skin tone. Like we're just all the gray people from Futurama except Caucasian, right? And that there's like I don't want to defend or attack any specific choices they made, but there is definitely some awkward winners write the history whitewashing stuff happening in this game, and it's all like super sunny and funny and
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. I think and I mean, and to be fair, like as a game developer, the best thing that you can do is just acknowledge your biases,
Sure.
And I think that, well, certainly not all game developers, because you still see some, truly deeply depressing games being made, like, Dante's Inferno. But like a good game developer will like seek out other people's opinions, because it's like, it's not about always being right. It's about being aware of your possible biases and seeking to challenge them. You're not going to get it right all the time, but when you get it wrong, to double back. But I don't think that, like you said, like, a couple of 3, white game developers in the 70s, I mean, like that, the fact that they addressed it in any capacity was, like shows that they were at least trying.
Yeah. And they didn't paint the native people as like, oh, in the night you were savages, brutally attacked by savages, right? Like they don't do anything like that. So that's at least something.
Yeah.
But here's the stuff that I want to pick your brain about. I was not able to do nearly enough playthroughs to stress test any of these theories, but there were a few spots where part of me was just like, how deep is this puddle? Like, is this like an inch deep puddle and I'm just going to get the very bottom of my shoes wet? Or am I going to step into this and it's going to be like a horror movie where I fall into another world? Because there are certain things, and I readily admit that this is all colored by modern gaming. Like I know what modern games are capable of and what modern game developers like to screw with people. So I may be looking way too deep into this very shallow puddle, but like one of the bad things that can happen to you is you can lose the trail, right? And like you lose a day or sometimes several days. If you stop and check your map, is that less likely to happen?
I don't think so. Maybe. I don't think so, though, because the first time I played through, I lost the trail about as often as I lost the trail the second time through. And I checked the map way less the second time through, because the first time I played through, I cared about the people that were, going from point A to point B. So I was very closely tracking my progress and like making plans and making rations and all sorts of stuff. The second time I was playing it fast and loose. So I didn't check the map at all. And I feel like I lost the trail about the same amount, but I mean, I did not, what is it? The difference between science and screwing around is writing it down. And I did not I did not track any of that, so I was definitely just screwing around.
And this is exactly my
But-
problem, is there are several places where part of me was just like, is this just truly random? Like, they're just periodically rolling like a d20, and then if it's high-low, this happens, or if it's over a certain number, that happens, or if it's this exact number, this other thing happens, right? Or are there other things, some of which are in my control and some of which are not in my control, that are influencing this kind of stuff? Because like wild fruit is another example. Like, on some of my playthroughs, I felt like I was finding wild fruit left and right. And it occurred to me, I was like, oh, maybe depending on what time of year it is and what part of the country you're in, you are way more likely to find wild fruit, because I felt like I always found it right in the middle of the journey. So I was like, maybe these certain parts of the country at the right time of season are way more likely to have wild fruit. Whereas if I had started earlier or later, or I took longer or less time to get here, I would have missed that peak, like too early or too late. I would have missed that peak wild fruit season and like not gotten all these wild fruit drops. Like, there's just all these little, the map thing, that thing, like things with hunting. There's all these little moments where I was like obsessing. It's like the meme of like the lady with the furrowed brow and all the math and numbers and like symbols flying around. Like, I was like, I feel like I'm looking way too deep into this, but there are some other little clever design choices, like the way they obscure easy, medium, hard, like the little visual of like the wagon breaking, like the way you interact with townspeople. Well, interact, that was generous. The way you can hear from townspeople, and it sort of like informs like future playthroughs. Like, is all this RNG stuff happening, or is like, am I just losing my damn mind? Like, do you even think there's a chance that this is happening, or am I just staring at a puddle that I think is deep because it happens to be a clear day?
Because you're super high.
I mean, no.
I would believe that. I'm not sure, like, if all of those, like, where it's like time of year and location, and like if it goes like that deep. But I would definitely believe that, towards the beginning and end of the years, like that fortuitous things are less likely to happen, like that I would imagine that time of year definitely has something to do with it. And there may just be, honestly, an element of like pure randomness to it, where it's just kind of like
interesting factors, but just total random numbers.
Right. Cause that would be very similar to, this is kind of a roguelike, right?
No.
Nope. Doesn't count.
I'm thumbs down on this being a roguelike.
Okay. No, because I was just thinking about it, because it's just kind of like, the idea is it's just trying to get the best run possible, right?
Yeah. So, but there's way too much about the game that's static.
Yeah, you're right. But anyways, it would not surprise me though if it had that kind of random element of like, sometimes you just have a good run, where it's just kind of like a lot of fortuitous things happen to you and you just made it through, and sometimes a lot of terrible stuff happens to you through no fault of your own, because that to me would feel more historically accurate. So I definitely think like some of like for instance, finding berries when it's warm out, but also like maybe robberies are more common when it's warm out as well, because, there are more people about, right? Like, but basically just kind of say like, look, man, all you can do on the Oregon Trail, right, is stuff you can personally control, right? So you can control what you buy, you can control how often you hunt, you can control the pace that you set, and those things directly relate to the things they correlate to, like your health, or what have you, like the amount of food that you have, right? But then that's it. And then the random stuff, just like on the Oregon Trail, you just have to like roll with it and deal with it.
I suppose what I'm really asking is, we know there is randomness in the game, right? You don't always break a wheel at exactly this day in this part of the trail, right? There's a lot of randomness built in. I guess what I'm really musing over is, how robust are the algorithms of that randomness? So if does wild fruit only appear at certain parts of the trail and certain times of year, and or is it just Yeah, when it's springtime, you can sometimes find wild fruit. Like there's a 1 in 5 chance you find wild fruit for these 2 months. It doesn't matter where you are on the trail, doesn't matter what you're doing, doesn't matter what you're close to, right? So like the randomness is surfaced in game experience in such a way that it would not be unbelievable to me that these algorithms are very clever, but they may be simple and it just happens to look clever, right? Like the part of the elephant I'm touching is a really interesting, like I have the knee and I'm like, oh man, there's all these folds and weirdness and it's like muscular, and somebody else just has the tail and they're like, it's a snake.
and the world may never know. But my guess, honestly, would be, I would guess that later versions of it probably have those robust algorithms. I would guess that this first iteration of it was more random. Yes, exactly. The one that we have our nostalgia goggles for. But yeah, do you have anything else?
I do have one other thing. This is another artifact of the way we played this. Because the emulator at archive.org is amazing, and if you want to go play any of these old games, you should go do that because it's really cool. But you can't save, and this game allowed saving, and it's not that the length of the game requires saving, but it had an element built into it that unfortunately neither of us got to experience, which is when you die of dysentery, it will leave gravestones around. And then on later playthroughs, you may actually come across gravestones from other players, right? From yourself or from other players. And the way they surface that in the game is there's one gravestone you always pass. And it's like a scenic spot where you can stop and choose to look at it. Did you not ever stop at the gravestone?
No.
Okay.
No, or at least it's not ringing a bell.
There's one tombstone, I guess, that you can always stop at, and you could type a message and it has your character's name on it, right? Because it's exactly like a real tombstone, right? It's like your name and an epitaph, and the default one that the game just includes for funsies, I don't remember the person's name, but their caption is, and I am deadly serious about this, "Hey, hey, hey, come out and play." And every time I passed that tombstone, I had to, it's like, do you want to stop and look around? I had to say yes every time because I was like, how is this happening? Like, how is this real life? Like, you feel like you live in the universe where everything always goes your way. I don't know how I ended up in the universe where that's a thing that happened. Like, it's bizarre, right?
Well, especially because, like, I'm thinking about, like, and I'm going to show my poor music chops here more so than I already have over all the podcasts. But, like, what's the one, like, where it's like,
The Offspring.
Hey.
Yes. The Offspring apparently got that from Oregon Trail.
Right? Because I was just kind of like, because Oregon Trail definitely didn't get it from them, So unless that song was, like, so popular that it reverberated back through time and they were just kind of like, this is it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, maybe that's what it was. Maybe that whole song was just an Oregon Trail reference, like, and we just never knew.
I don't know. I'm feeling like maybe that's from an old TV show, an old movie, a poem, some other cultural touchstone that these two unrelated things happen to be touching on, because I don't know what I would think about the world if I find out that Offspring song is a reference to Oregon Trail. Like, if it was the other way around, like if it turns out that song came out in like 89, which it didn't, but if that song came out in like 89 and this is a reference to that song, then I would be like, oh, okay, someone who designed the game is also like a Offspring fan. Like, that's believable. But the other direction, that would be insane. Madness. It would be utter madness.
But anyway, so, big question. Did it hold up?
So I struggled over this. I struggled over what I wanted to call my feelings about this, because I have my personal feelings about the visuals, and I understand that that's not representative of everyone. That's very strongly me. The music, anyone in their right mind would hate this music because it's grating. It's just grating and horrible. But there isn't very much of it, so that's not so bad. And the gameplay is satisfying and interesting in a way that I think almost no other educational game maybe ever has been. So I wanted to say you could play this with no nostalgia goggles, but it feels just slow and awkward enough that I think if you put this in the hands of someone with a high games literacy, but only in like the modern era, like they're maybe much younger or they got into games later, so they started with more modern games, I think they would really struggle with just the slow. It would be way more obvious to someone in that situation that this is an educational game because nothing about it would seem fantastical or interesting or novel, and they would have no nostalgia for it, so they wouldn't necessarily be willing to be patient with it. So I really think I have to give it a nostalgia monocle. I think if you have no patience for games of this type, even if you didn't play this particular game, but if you have no patience for games of this type, I don't know. I think you would sit down and be like, so did they remake this more recently? And you'd want to play like one of the newer, more graphically and auditorially satisfying versions.
I definitely agree that, I'm sure that as they improve the game, obviously the game got better. As far as, do you need nostalgia goggles to play this? I think that the only way, because I think no, I don't think that you would need nostalgia goggles to play this. But the reasoning, though, I think is because to me, it's like the difference between me going to watch like a sitcom like Friends or going to watch like SciShow on YouTube. Like it's a different headspace. So like it's not fantastic. I agree, it's not fantastical. It's definitely like I wouldn't like if I wanted to just kick back, relax, and shoot somebody in the face, right? Like this is not the game for that. Even if I just wanted to like kick back, relax, and like web sling around the town, I could play Spider-Man, right? But if somebody said like, hey, I want you, like if I was in a place where I was like, I want to play like a thought-provoking, like semi-educational thing, where I'm like willing to like sit down and like focus on it and like have that additional patience, I think that this game still delivers on that. But I definitely think that you can't go into it being like, I'm going to play random adventure game X. You have to be like, I want to play something where I know part of it is me becoming educated.
Yeah, and I guess that's part of my issue is I could imagine this mystery persona that I've created, like high games literacy, but only in more modern games. I could imagine that person saying, I've always wanted to try a text adventure. I'm going to go back and play like Zorg or whatever that super early popular one was. I could imagine someone going back, playing an early text adventure and enjoying it, or playing a modern text adventure that's still done in the classic style and enjoying it. I think someone who reached out for Oregon Trail, who had no nostalgia experience of it and wasn't particularly into text adventure style games, would immediately be like, oh, this is like one of those educational games that kids used to play. Right? Because it would be almost impossible to reach out and play this game without knowing the cultural, like, it's like if you went to someone who is over like 10 or 15 right now and played Michael Jackson for them and they somehow never heard it, but they lived in like a first world country, they would be like, oh, wasn't he like the biggest star in the world for a while and then went and said, like, it'd be impossible for them to hear that and know who it was and not have all of the cultural burden on them. And it kind of feels like Oregon Trail's in that place. Like, you either have this amazing nostalgia experience of it like we do and like a lot of people do, or you would be like, oh, this is that game that has all those t-shirts at Hot Topics where like people crap themselves to death. Is that this game? This is the crap yourself to death t-shirt game?
And the answer is, like, hey man, Oregon Trail, it's fine. It's not necessarily the best in the world, but it's not dying of dysentery.
The curtain falls. The music plays, the credits roll, then it all fades to black, and you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone, there's no player 2, there by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creep in with the edge of a smile.